and he is, got it. And he is the minister. I tried to say this word 10 times and I thought I had.
Emeritus.
Thank you. And our reader will be Vicki Schwartz. I'm going to light a candle, and then Vicki, you can go ahead and read, and then you can begin. Let's see if I can do this. And this morning, the candle represents love and concern and our connection with each other.
Thank you, Anita. It's wonderful to see so many people here this morning, and anticipating that we were going to have a big crowd. I chose a reading from our UU hymnal.
Oh, nice.
It's called We Bid You Welcome. We bid you welcome, who come with weary spirit seeking rest, who come with troubles that are too much with you, who come hurt and afraid. We bid you welcome, who come with hope in your heart, who come with anticipation in your step, or who come proud and joyous. We bid you welcome, who are seekers of a new faith, who come to probe and explore, who come to learn. We bid you welcome, who enter this space as a homecoming, who have found here room for your spirit, who find in this people a family. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever you are, wherever you are on your journey, we bid you welcome. These are words from the Reverend Richard S. Gilbert. And Dick, we really extend a very warm welcome to you this morning. We're so glad you could be with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. Good to see so many familiar faces and a few new faces too, and so many of you. As is typical with me, I'm going to begin with a text. Some words I wrote as a preface for a book, which I'll mention later. I think you're old enough, most of you are old enough to remember the book by Paul Goodman, Growing Up Absurd. Anybody remember that book? He was in a kind of a countercultural kind of guy. Anyway, one of my seminary professors picked up on that and was teaching a course in religious education. And he said, no, it should be Growing Up Absorbed. And so that's what I've chosen. And so here are a few words to kind of put a little frame around what I'll say. Growing up is absurd and absorbing. The almost absurd transformation from infancy to senility, from innocence to wisdom, from birth to death. The absorbing reality of choosing a life and a way to live it and to give it. Growing passion and compassion as arms and legs of the soul. Creating community, moving from me to we. Committing one's life to something that will outlast it. Growing up is absurd and absorbing. So be it. Usually I have a script, a text when I preach or give a talk. I don't now, so I've told Anita that if I go on too long, she has full permission to check me, say, hey, you're going on too long, you're getting tired, whatever. But I'll zip along for my 85 years and catch a few of the highlights that may be of interest to you. Well, born in 1936, September 21st, to Leighton Gilbert, who had an 8th grade education and became a maintenance manager in a factory. 8th grade education because he had to go to work to support his family when his father died. So he was a hard worker, a very intelligent man. I just feel badly in a sense that he didn't have the educational opportunities that I've had, because he would have been, I'm sure, a civil engineer or something like that. That was the kind of guy he was. I still use, when I clear snow, a device he rigged up to push snow without having to bend your back very much. And he just had that kind of Yankee ingenuity, and was a hard worker and knew just work all his life from 8th grade on. My mother was a high school graduate from Honeyori High School. And she did take one more year of what they call normal school, preparing to be a teacher, but then she married my father. I'm an only child. I grew up in Bristol on Baptist Hill and have just such sweet nostalgic memories of that time. In fact, I revisit the church in which I grew up, which is now UCC, United Church of Christ. It was Universalist in those days. And I go back a couple of times a year to preach.
Yes, sir.
Or to be there.
Yes.
Somebody have something? I thought somebody said something. I'm too loud or something. Anyway, I have those wonderful memories, and we have created a Gilbert Family Scholarship for students there who are going on to some form of post-high school education. And so I go back every year to give that award. And I find the kids are very tall these days. That's what I find. I find I'm a shrinking violet before their size, boys and girls. But it's nice to touch base again there and to see these young kids coming on. I went to a one-room schoolhouse. I used to read in school about kids who used to huddle around the stove in the 19th century to keep warm, as we were huddling around the stove to keep warm in the 40s and so on. We had outhouses in those days. I grew up in an outhouse at home and at school.
Dick, you've become muted somehow.
I unmuted myself before. Okay. I don't know how much I missed. Anyway, I was born Universalist and attended that little Universalist church on Baptist Hill, and got my perfect attendance pins. We lived literally a stone's throw from the church, and so that church was always central in my life, for church on Sunday mornings and for dinners and so forth. When I went to Canandaigua, it was the big city. I went there in 7th grade. We had a choice of going to Canandaigua or to Bloomfield. My parents, I think, happily chose Canandaigua. And I had some wonderful years there. Some embarrassing moments. Many of you know that I am not a singer, as my wife Joyce is. But in 7th grade, the 7th grade group that I was in, all the kids there were in a chorus. I started this is one of my proudest moments. There were 3 divisions of 7th grade. 713 for the slower kids, 723 for the average kids, and 732 for the brighter kids. And when I went in for my interview as a country kid, Miss Wolverton, the principal, I can see her to this day, said, looking at my A report card from this little country school, said, well, sometimes these country children, when they get in the city, don't do as well. And so one of my proudest moments is when I was moved from 723 to 732. The trouble is that I was with the really smart kids and the kids who had all had music lessons. And so we had a chorus. Everybody in that class was in a chorus. And of course, I'd had no music lessons. I didn't know anything about singing, but I was automatically there. The only kid in the chorus, only boy in the chorus to wear short sleeves to the concert. And I think I heard myself occasionally during that concert. So one of my more embarrassing moments. Anyway, I was a Boy Scout in those days, and went on with a minister of our church who was a pacifist, Universalist pacifist, to get the God and Country Award, which was a Scout Church award. And that year, 1951, I went to the Boy Scout Jamboree in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. There I had the first of my memorable religious experiences. It was a Sunday morning. There were about 30,000 of us going to the Protestant service. And then across the hills of Valley Forge, there were the kids in the Catholic service and I suppose Mormons and so on. And I don't know if the Jews met there or not. I didn't know then. All I know is that there was a Methodist minister from Indiana who preached a sermon about Christian love and giving and so forth. And I was just overwhelmed with emotion, cried, and decided essentially on the spot to become a minister. So that was my first really mystical experience. And then I went on to work on this God and Country Award, gave my first sermon on July 11th, I think, 1951, when I was 14. And the rest is ministerial history. I went to Canandaigua, class of 54. I'm always amazed when I talk with people who say their high school years were just awful. Mine were wonderful. I mean, I enjoyed my studies. I did well. I played basketball, football, baseball, did pretty well there. I bragged to my grandsons who won't believe me that I was an all-conference quarterback in football. They still don't believe it. So I'm digging out the newspaper clipping that I think I still have. And I had a girlfriend for the last couple of years in high school. So high school was just very, very nice. And then during that time, I became an Eagle Scout. So scouting was important to me. And then I've seen what the Boy Scouts have become since then. It's just not my memory at all. And in fact, I still have contact with the class of 54. I'm going to host a Zoom call with class members this coming Thursday for the few who Zoom. We've had to curtail our personal lunches, but we have one of our members in Vietnam, and that's kind of fun to touch base with him. Vietnam, Maine, Pennsylvania, Florida. It's really good for us to get together. Zoom is a tie that binds for all that we complain about being zoomed out. Unirondack, church camp. Many of you are familiar with it. I went there for the first time when I was 14 for LRY camp and met Joyce. Nothing happened in particular between us. We knew each other, but that was about it. I worked on the crew there for a couple of years after that and served as program director. So Unirondack really has an important place in my life. Then I was off to St. Lawrence University, class of 58. And college was kind of like high school. I had a great time. Academics went well. I played football. I was crushed when I didn't make the basketball or baseball teams, but I had to be a one sport person. But that's all right. Although one of my friends, I played quarterback, one of my good friends, who's no longer with us, said I was the only quarterback in the history of St. Lawrence ever to wind up owing the school yardage. So that was for you football fans, that will mean something. For the rest of you, what does that mean? Anyway, go to the Super Bowl and you will know. So theological school, graduated in 1961. Seminary was great. It was a very small group of people. There were only, I think, 8 in my class. There were only about 15 in the school, but we had a marvelous time. We lived together, we cooked together, we ate together, we did so many things together, including talking our dean on one early summer day in June to take us birding. He was a birder. And we talked him into taking us birding instead of having class that day. I'll never forget Angus McLean, my dear friend, who became a very dear friend. 1959 was big. Joyce and I reconnected. Kind of accidental. It was the New York State Convention of Universalists. We met at the then Universalist Church in Syracuse. My seminary class went down, and we happened to sit in a pew right in front of this very lovely girl with a very much Ichabod Crane looking man who happened to be her minister. And I thought, what is this beautiful girl doing with this old guy? And so I wasn't very aggressive with my romancing. I don't think I picked her up, but somehow I started talking with her, and we found out that we had Unirondack in common. She'd seen me in Syracuse when I was working for a scholarship through Syracuse University through a program that ran through the high schools of New York State. And so we connected, and I managed to wheedle an opportunity to drive her to where she was staying. And that began our romance. So we celebrated our 60th wedding anniversary last summer and had planned a big party, but there weren't any big parties last summer that would be safe. So maybe we'll do it this summer if things are better. So 61, we got married, and I got my first job in Cleveland as assistant minister at First Unitarian Church. My job was mostly religious education. I was an RE major in seminary, and so was administering a church school of 750 kids, if you can imagine it. We had a lot of kids in those days. The church was about 1,000 people. It was a big church with a big church school. And I began to get in trouble for the first time. I started preaching social justice matters, fair housing, and so on. And even though this was a Unitarian church, nonetheless, there were some really conservative folks there who got very upset with me. And I can give you book, line, and verse. But it was highlighted when I was attacked at an annual church meeting. Usually the church annual meetings were preceded by cocktail parties in homes around Shaker Heights. And so people came to the church for dinner, very relaxed and very happy about the world. And they had a big dinner. And then this little group, which didn't like me, some of them were rumored to be John Birch Society members, attacked me for corrupting youth, for letting a communist group use the church, all of which was not true. And the minister then, Bob Killam, my boss, to me had his finest hour when he defended me. But I, who had been a kind of a goody-goody two-shoes, I hadn't had a lot of criticism. Life had been pretty easy and simple for me up to that point. But I really took it on the chin, but he came to my defense, and I stayed another year and learned some real lessons about doing social justice. In fact, that experience prompted me to head for the University of Chicago Divinity School, where I finally left after 1 year. I started a program in ethics and society and was having a wonderful academic time. And along came Selma. And the president of the UUA invited UU ministers to head to Selma for the memorial service for James Reed, who you will recall in 1965 was murdered on the streets of Selma. So I went. When I came back, I had another transforming experience there. Martin Luther King brushed by me on his way to the pulpit to give the eulogy. And it was an overwhelming experience to be in Brown's Chapel, Black and white, Protestant, Christian, Jew, farmers, PhDs, professors, ministers, just an incredible amalgam of people all together. And when we sang "We Shall Overcome" at the end of the service after King's eulogy of Reeb, and the Jewish cantor chanted the prayer for the dead, again, I was overwhelmed. And I decided that academia was not where I was meant to be. I came back told Joyce, I want to go back into the ministry. I was writing a chapter or a paper on the transformative role of the church in the thought of H. Richard Niebuhr, a truly exciting topic. But and I would share it with my professor. That would be it. I had an experience to share. I had no church to share it with. And so I decided to go back to the ministry, and Ithaca came along, and I had 5 wonderful years there. I worked with Father Daniel Berrigan, had dinner with Thich Nhat Hanh, who died recently, and just had some great experiences. And of course, Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. were martyred during that time. And so being on the campus, on the Cornell campus, and trying to deal with that, all those experiences was just amazing. But I had good years there, did a lot more with social action. Oh yes, a couple other little details. We had 2 children. Matthew in 66, lest I forget, Matthew in 66, Douglas in 69. Matthew, who was visiting this weekend, which is why I was taking Joyce to lunch at her birthday. Matthew went to the Harley School here in Rochester, went on to Oberlin College. And then he went to New York City and finally wound up getting a PhD in molecular endocrinology. Some of you may know what that is. I don't, but I can still say the words. Molecular endocrinology. But he's teaching in a private school, a boys' choir school in New York City. Douglas is here in town with our grandchildren. Douglas teaches at Harley School, from which he graduated. And he has 3 kids. Sam, who's 19 and still trying to figure out what life is all about and what he's going to do with his life. He's still in town. Jack, who is a sophomore, and Ellie, who is the youngest of the pair of the 3. She's adopted from South Korea. And so we get a large part of what we're doing now is grandparenting, going to a lot of games, soccer, swim meets, volleyball, basketball, the whole thing. And so we're so lucky to be here. Came here in 1970. Wasn't really looking for a church, but Sue Short, Dave is here somewhere, I see. Sue Short and Dave came down, is my understanding of it, came down for a memorial service, which I conducted. It was during the time when you were in search. And she apparently liked something in what I was doing and called me and asked, would I like to be considered as a candidate or a pre-candidate for the church? And so hadn't thought about it, talked with Joyce. Joyce was a U of R graduate, so why not? So I left Ithaca. I had a great time there. It was just so much fun being on the Cornell campus. Fun maybe is not the word for it, but interesting at least is the word for it. Being on the campus and in town and trying to bridge the gaps between town and gown. Ithaca is a community, is a university town, but it's still a town. And there are a lot of upstate New York town folks there who aren't related to Cornell or Ithaca. So it was a fascinating experience. So one of the reasons I left was I felt I wanted to do a lot more in adult education. And when your congregation is filled with 2/3 of professors and you want to do something by way of, you point out, you look at the congregation, you find out there's a world-class professor in your congregation, like Yuri Bronfenbrenner, for example, in terms of children. And so because of Cornell, it was so dominant, I didn't have the full church experience I really wanted. And plus the excitement of going to the big city where I had been a few times in my youth. It was a big trip in those days to go to Rochester. So we decided to go, candidated, and went in 1970. I remember, speaking of Rita Rosenfeld, she was living in the old parsonage, and that summer, the summer that we came, lightning struck a tree in the front yard and knocked it down, which was an ill omen. But anyway, we came. And it's hard to summarize 32 years, but among some of the highlights, I think, helping to work toward setting up a caring community. I discovered very soon that this was too big a church for me to be able to make every hospital call, to make every home visit, and so forth. It got tiring. I got tired. And so we created a caring community and did some training of people to give care for people in the congregation. Another important event was the creation of the social responsibility process. Again, I was doing a lot of preaching on social justice, but I felt the need for support from the congregation, and most often I had it. But I felt that the congregation as a community should be engaged in the wider community. And so we set up this congregational process of selecting certain issues. Some events really stand out. I know during the Vietnam War, I withheld my telephone tax as a war protest. And finally, the IRS was going to garnish my wages. And I felt it was not fair to get the church in legal jeopardy and put them on the spot. So we created a sidewalk worship service. I went down to the local IRS office, invited members of the congregation to accompany me. I had a check made out. I discovered from some lawyer in the church that you could write a check on anything. And so I had a big anti-war poster. War is not healthy for children and other living things. And I signed it for the, I don't know, $10.54 or something like that. I've forgotten some modest amount. Signed it and went to the IRS, and we had a moving anti-war demonstration out in front as I went inside and delivered my check to the bemused and astonished clerk. I don't think they ever did cash it. And of course, many other events. One Saturday, I came back from being out of town, found on my desk an anonymous note saying the Chamber of Commerce had refused permission for the Gay Alliance of the Genesee Valley to have their 10th or 20th celebration there. And how could we as a church ignore such a slight to human rights? And I think I had preached maybe on homosexuality once, because I was a pretty innocent kid growing up, and so I had very little contact with the wider world. Anyway, I didn't have time to consult the board or anything like that, because it was a Saturday afternoon. I had a sermon to preach, and that Sunday morning, I said I was going to recommend to the Board of Trustees, which was meeting that Tuesday, that we cancel our annual canvas dinner, which was to be held at the same Chamber of Commerce venue which had denied the gay rights group permission to use it. And I had no idea the response I would get because I hadn't talked with anybody about it. There wasn't time. To my pleasant surprise, I got a standing ovation from almost all the members of the church. And so that was the beginning of our First Unitarian becoming a welcoming community. Another big event was the great organ transplant. Everyone was embarrassed at the old electronic organ that we had. And so when Ed Shell, with his tentacles out, learned that St. Bernard's Seminary was closing down and they were disposing or getting rid of their organ, a 1964 Baroque organ, and they were asking, what, $12,000, some incredibly small amount of money for it. Don Wilder then, I don't know if Don is here or not, but anyway, Don Wilder was canvas chair then, and we thought, how could we, in the middle of the canvas, how could we spring for an organ without a congregational meeting and all the stuff we had to do? There wasn't time, and this organ might go off to some other bidder, and Ed was really anxious to have it. So I think about 12 of us ended up $1,000 a piece and bought the organ. So for a few days, I owned 1/12 of an organ that was being removed from St. Bernard's church. And so we bought the organ. Don was in on this. Of course, as a music guy, he would be. And so he thought it would not hurt the canvas at all. So we just did it. And then we 12 sold it to the congregation at a subsequent date. And that was the great organ transplant. And I will long remember the members of this congregation going over to St. Bernard's on the west side, taking the organ apart with supervision. Ed Shell supervised and another organ expert took the pieces of the organ one by one, labeled them carefully during the summer, brought them over, put them in our church school rooms, and then over the summer began assembling this organ. It was an incredible, and I will never forget the board meeting. We were in a board meeting on a Tuesday night, and all of a sudden we heard this boom, boom. And what is going on? The building was shaking. It was the first sound coming from the organ before it had been voiced and tuned. And we all left the meeting and went into the sanctuary, and there was this organ in place. Roger Coakley and others had built these beautiful sound boxes up there, making it a beautifully aesthetic. And the biggest crowd that I had in a Sunday morning was when we dedicated the organ. And that was a mighty thing, the great organ transplant, a high point of my time at First Unitarian. We tried to do a collaborative ministry. I never liked the title senior minister, never wanted it. And so I was parish minister, and we finally got to the point of having a minister of religious education. And our teaming was not often used by many others. Most large churches had a senior minister. And so I did battle with that with my colleagues from the large churches. One of the mistakes I think I made, I tried, our church, if you know the church lexicon, there is a program church, which is a large church with many parts and so forth. And then there was a pastoral church, which is a smaller church where the minister gives attention to everybody. I tried to be a minister in a pastoral church, in a church that was really a program church. In other words, tried to do too much, I think, probably, and I spread myself probably pretty thin and got a little tired in the process. Other highlights of the church, I did social action work for 20 or 30 years. I was chair of Interfaith Impact of New York State. And by the way, shameless plug, on March 13th, John Gilbert can tell you more about this. We're having Interfaith Impact, which is dissolved as a state group, but we have a local group yet, is sponsoring a program on universal basic income, solving poverty in Rochester. So that will be on March 13th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It'll be virtual. And John Gilbert can give you all the contact information on that. We now have a new group, New York UUs for Justice, NUDGE, as we're calling it. And I have taken back, I'm on a clergy advisory board, but the relief of not being the president of Interfaith Impact is considerable. I had some wonderful sabbaticals while I was at First Unitarian. One at Harvard Divinity School. That was a great thing. A little kid from Bristol going to Harvard Divinity School was quite hard for me to understand. The poignancy of that event was that my father at that time was dying, and I debated leaving for the semester. My mother told me to go, and about 3 days after I arrived in Boston, he died and I came back. So that was a very sad event in my life. I was active at UUA headquarters, or New UA. I was on the nominating committee, chair of the social concerns panel. I was, by mistake, secretary treasurer of the Ministers Association. I had no idea what double entry bookkeeping meant, and I made a terrible mess of it. And one of the members of this church, Tom and Debbie Gill, bailed me out because he straightened my books out for me. Another humbling experience. We traveled a lot during our 32 years there. Joyce set up several trips for the church. Many of you probably were on them. I got to most of them. Other travel journeys that I have made that have been important to me, one with the New York State Labor Religion Coalition to the Mexican border to see the Maquiladero factories exploiting Mexican labor. We've been to Germany, UK, all over Europe, the Philippines, where I had a great experience with the Unitarian Universal Service Committee being detained by the Philippine military one night when they burst out of the bushes and essentially arrested us, took us up on a hillside which was mined. If you wanted to take care of nature, you had to be escorted by an armed guard so you wouldn't blow yourself up on a mine. We heard shots in the night. It was a very interesting experience. I can say more about that if any of you are interested, but again, for the UUSC, we spent some time in Japan visiting Douglas, who was there as an ESL teacher. We tried to get to South Africa. I tried to get to South Africa with a group, the Committee for Justice in Southern Africa, of which I was a part. And we were turned down twice. In fact, Joyce and I tried to go when we visited Douglas in Kenya, where he was a student, but didn't make it. 0 for 3. Finally, we got to South Africa 2 or 3 years ago and met the former Unitarian minister who was mayor of Cape Town when Nelson Mandela got out of prison. So we had some great experiences there talking with people.
Can you take 2 or 3 minutes and wrap up?
Yes.
Because I'm sure that people will have questions and comments.
Right. Okay,
and we want to
I've
give
gone
them
on
a
for quite a
chance
while.
to do that.
Okay.
No, you're doing just fine. I just,
Yeah, I asked you to give me a reminder, and that's good. You reminded.
okay. You have a couple minutes.
Anita was my so-called administrative assistant when I was there, and she kept track of me right next door for a number of years. Other things, writing has been important. I went to a mid-career seminar and found out that I really like to write. And so I've been writing a lot since and continue that. Some of you may be familiar with the Building Your Own Theology series, my book on the prophetic imperative on social action, How Much Do We Deserve, a book on economic justice, a couple of books on meditations in the holy quiet, and Thanks Be for These, the title of which I developed listening to a concert in the sanctuary at First Unitarian, one of our Sunday afternoon concerts. Then I've written a couple of books, Growing Up Absorbed, which is my philosophy of religious education and faith development, and an anthology of religious education history called In the Middle of the Journey. Now I'm working on a book on Susan B. Anthony, No Consorting with Angels, The Spiritual Life of Susan B. Anthony, who of course was a member of First Unitarian, joining January 1st, 1893. Retirement's been good. I've done Inver Ministries in Golden, Colorado, just a wonderful group of people and beautiful mountains of Colorado. And then I spent 2 years as interim in Ithaca, which was very strange, coming back after I left there in 1970, coming back in 2003 through 5 to meet some of the same people, but a whole new crowd and a whole new situation, but great experiences. So now one of the great reliefs of retirement is now I get to watch all the football games and basketball games I want. Don't have to go to church. We had to set up a Super Bowl party because we did an orientation series for newcomers in January. I think that was a great time to do it. But the Super Bowl always was there and orientation really got in the way. And so I thought, I'm not going to give up any more Sundays watching football that I love just to do church. And so we created the famous Super Bowl parties up in Gilbert Hall. In the middle was a buffet table. On one side were the bridge players and people who want to play games and so forth. On the other side were the rabid football fans, the Ron Steinmans of the wards and others who are football aficionados. And my favorite thing would be when we would shout over to the bridge players, "Hey, bridge players, keep it down, please." And of course, we've been shouting because the Buffalo Bills had just lost another Super Bowl. but those were great times. So now I get to watch a lot of sports, watch the grandkids playing sports, and try to keep myself in shape. I walk a mile or so one Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, lift weights Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and do PT and try to keep busy going up and down stairs. So I leave you with just my my philosophy of life. Briefly, is to grow a soul, to love and to be loved, and to help repair a broken world. So that is the sum of it.
Thank you so much, Dick. It was a wonderful story, wonderful to hear all the varied things that you've done and a little information about what you're doing now. And now we'll open this for questions and comments, and one of my co-hosts will help me identify who's ready to speak.
And if you'd like to speak, it'd be most helpful if under reactions, you could click down there on the bottom of the button and put a raise hand. That'll make it easier for us to spot you. Thank you.
Fire away.
Go ahead. Oh.
Dave Friedman has his hand up.
I think you've played a role in mentoring young ministers. I don't know whether you wanted to talk about that at all.
Oh, yeah. Well, including one Lisa Friedman.
Who's on the call, by the way? I noticed.
Oh, is she really? Oh, hi, Lisa, wherever you are.
Hi, Dick.
Yeah, hi. Hi. Oh, there you are. I see you. I see you now. It's still in the Twin Cities at Unity Church, St. Paul.
I'm actually doing a developmental ministry now in Minnetonka.
Minnetonka in Minnesota. Oh, good.
In Minnesota, still where it's going to be a high of 5 degrees today.
Whoa.
But I was going to ask this question about mentoring too, and the teaching congregation, the interns, and all of the ministers that you've inspired, what that's been like.
Well, that has been fun. Now, Lisa was not an intern there. Lisa grew up in our church, of course. We stole the Friedmans away. What was his name? The skier, David, Don, your boss. Anyway,
Fader.
Don
Don
Fader.
Fader.
Don Fader was a skier. We had a ski club. The ski club came about, this is a long way around. The ski club came about when Joyce and I tried to go on a ski club trip together. We found out we didn't ski at the same rate on the same slopes. So we thought we would have a wider group. And so the ski club came into being. Don Fader, who was an active member of it, invited Dave Friedman and family along. And that meant Lisa and her sister and Dave and Linda. Anyway, it wasn't supposed to be proselytizing, but it wound up being that way. Anyway, Lisa grew up in our congregation. Let's see, another minister, whose name I'm fitting now, is in Madison, Wisconsin, Kelly Athwood.
That would be Kelly, yes.
Yeah, Kelly, yeah. There we are. I see proud parents right there, taking one of our really big churches in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm trying to think of others some who grew up in our church, and I can remember taking these kids to Boston for a field trip, which was always an adventure. But the other part of this was we had a number of interns over the years. We had a hard time raising the money to pay them a paltry amount of money to pick up their lives and move to Rochester for a year. But we had wonderful interns who shared the ministry of the church. And we had a nice little system we developed. About mid-year, we decided, we talked with them. If they were having a good time and if we liked them, we would offer them a summer ministry. In those days, the two ministers, MRE and me, we would be out of town mostly. And so they would get the experience of operating a large church, which in the summer became a more modest church. And so we had several of those people who came, many of them in ministry now, some sadly dropped out of ministry, but it was a way. The Khaki Metig is the one I remember, especially so proud to get her into the parish ministry. She was an activist in Central America and wondered if she could do social action in the church. I assured her she could. And so she has. She's become a very good minister, and I don't know if she's still working on the UU College for Social Justice. And of course, we're very proud of Lisa and Kelly for their ministries, splitting up from the church. That's a very, very proud thing to have spawned to our congregation, to this congregation, to have spawned ministers out in our movement. So yeah, that has been certainly a highlight.
Anyone else? We must have more questions or comments.
Pauline has her hand up. Colleen,
Tell her to unmute.
raise your hand. Looks like you're working on unmuting yourself.
There we go.
Maybe.
Okay. Okay.
Am I in
Speak.
there?
Yes.
Okay. Well, there's so much I would love to say because so much happened and it was such a wonderful influence in my life being part of the church while under Dick Gilbert's direction. And but I particularly want to mention what Joyce Gilbert contributed over those years to the life of our church and of our denomination, and what she did in music, which was just wonderful. The new music book that we've used for years now was new, largely under her direction for the whole denomination. And there were just so many things that Dick had encouraged other people to go into, like myself, into the Susan B. Anthony house and all that goes on and went on there. And it was really important in my life, and discovered things about Susan B. Anthony's connection with our church. And so I think it's always interesting in how many ways ministers influence other people's lives without realizing. So thanks a lot, Dick.
Thank you. I call it spiritual osmosis. That's my theory. But yeah, Joyce certainly has been an important part, obviously, of my life, but in the church, not all minister spouses are active in church. She was active because she wanted to be. She had grown up, and that we were both born Universalists. So we both had a lot of church experience in youth group and so on. And so it came naturally to her. She wasn't forced into it. I didn't ask her to do it, but she loved to sing. And so she was always in the choir. She did the Gilbert and Sullivan many times. In fact, one of my favorite stories is I was out in the audience for a Gilbert and Sullivan thing, and this one woman started singing, and she was very beautiful, I thought, but with long black hair and so forth. I said, "Who is she?" And I thought, I feel a little guilty because I'm really attracted to her. Turned out to be Joyce. I didn't recognize her with all the makeup and the wig on. So that's one of my favorite stories. And she was instrumental. She really founded the Unitarian Universalist Musicians Network, which has now changed its name, but it's become a professional association of musicians, and I think has made incredible contributions. She calls it her third child because she got it going, and now they're going great guns and developing a lot of music that wouldn't have happened without her bringing those people together, she and Ed Shell. And of course, that's another thing that was such a highlight of my time working with Ed Shell, which was just a great fun. The non-musical minister working with Ed and the musical forces of the church.
John Parker has his hand up. Anita?
Okay, John.
We can't hear you.
Unmute.
He's unmuted, but not close enough to the mic, I think.
Right.
No.
Okay, I'll move it.
You still need to be closer, John.
Dick, I very much appreciated your review of your history with the church, and it very much follows mine with the church. And the things that I remember is Joyce had a hand in getting our new hymnal with some of the hymns that were selected. And I remember you, of course, as our august leader of the ski club, which was a wonderful experience for many long years, freezing my butt off at Tremblant. And
I remember that.
it was great. And I was just curious, what influence did Bob West have on you?
Well, I didn't know Bob very well because I was in Ithaca. He was here. He was minister of this large church. He was a social activist. He preached. He helped with the Pentagon Papers, the publication of the Pentagon Papers, which were instrumental, I think, in helping bring an end to the Vietnam War. I didn't have much direct contact with him, but certainly his reputation and what he preached and what he did with race relations. He's very active in integration work, as well as I say, the Pentagon Papers. And then, of course, he became president of the UUA. And then he steered the UUA through some very difficult times. They were tumultuous times. The Black Affairs controversy, which I can go into, but that's another long story. He negotiated through that. And the denomination lost money and was in deep debt. The Pentagon Papers were being published, and the UUA was about to be sued. And so he was president for 8 years and steered a steady ship and some of the most difficult times going. So I didn't know Bob. I went to a few parties with Bob. I didn't know him well personally, but certainly through his efforts through social action in the church and in the UUA were important for me.
Thank you. They were very good friends of ours. And,
oh, I know.
And so we had a grand time. And anyway, you and he are the two outstanding ministers that I can recall from my memory.
And Bob died just a couple of years ago, and Nancy a few years before him.
And now Lynn Kinsman.
Yep. Lynn Kinsman.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hi, Lynn.
Yeah, I'm not able to get my camera to work today. I think I need to reboot my computer, but I wanted to share just one favorite memory I have working with Dick Gilbert, and it would require me to share my screen for a moment. Would that be all right? I have one picture I just want to share.
Oh, sure.
The host has to let me share my screen though.
Oh. Somebody doing
That's what
that?
I'm going to learn is screen sharing.
Yeah, I would share it as my virtual background, but I can't get my camera to work today. So
It's taking just a few minutes to find you in the long list of participants. We'll get there.
okay.
In the meantime, Glenn, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, just Dick, I want to say I share your passion for the memory of the great organ transplant, and I hope you can rejoin us here on March 5th. I'm going to devote this whole time to the great organ transplant with a lot of details and names of people that are no longer with us. But the true cost of the pipe organ was $17,500.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
there were 18 of us that
18.
loaned the church $1,000 each.
I like to think we bought the organ first and then sold it to the church.
There you go. There you go.
I didn't know what I would do with 1/18 of an organ, but it was fun for a while.
It sure
Yeah,
was.
that's right. Glenn's right.
So I hope you can join us.
Well, thank you.
You should be okay now then.
Thank you.
Okay.
Lynn?
Yes, I'm going to share my screen. And this might give some people a chuckle. This is Dick Gilbert playing the lion in one of our canvas entertainment shows.
Oh, gosh.
1988. My first year at the church. That's me.
You look so young, oh boy.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share. You got involved in many ways.
But you sent me that picture. I don't have that picture. I would love
Sure.
to.
Sure will.
Oh my gosh. Oh yeah, we had a lot of canvas fun. We tried to make the canvas. That was difficult. I was not really very enthusiastic about asking people for money. Well, there's Don Wilder. I see Don Wilder. He helped me learn to be more involved in this whole process. But we tried to make the canvas fun. And I will say that working on the canvas committee was one of the most enjoyable experiences I had. It just doesn't sound possible. Our canvas meetings were a lot of fun. And we tried to make the canvas as much fun.
Yep, I had a good time being in part of that. Many of
And
those.
Don was chair more times than he or I could probably remember.
So there's another hand up. I will.
Yep.
The
The
Steinmans.
Steinmans, yes, I can see that now.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, Dick.
Hi, Ira.
Hi.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. And you made such a difference in our lives and in the community and our children's lives. I don't know what else to say. It's just been wonderful having you and hearing your story, some of which we didn't know. I do remember one thing in addition to The Wizard of Oz, is your being the preacher in your pink suit.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little about that? I think it came from a secondhand store.
Yeah. We picked that up at the Harley sale. Joyce was active as a parent. Our kids went to Harley, and there was a pink suit there, and we saw it. And I don't know if Joyce mentioned it first or I mentioned it. And she said, well, try on the jacket, and it fit perfectly. And I thought, well, and she said, well, shall we get it? And so, well, we'll dye it. Pink is too elaborate a color, too bright a color. We can't do that, but we could dye it. It was $5. Nobody would buy it off the shelf. It came from some local store on Monroe Avenue, some shop or other. Anyway, we bought it for, I think, $5. And I got to wear it when I did my some of my canvas work. I would wear it when I became one of the, not a Pat Robertson, but who was the guy in Tulsa?
Oral Roberts.
Oral Roberts, yeah, when I became Oral Roberts. Yeah. Tacky McTeague was up on the parapet around the outside of the sanctuary. It was such an irresponsible thing to do, but she did it. She was in this wonderful dress. She was God and I was Oral Roberts, and we had a little dialogue. She worked around behind me, and so the congregation could see her, but of course I couldn't. And so we had this dialogue about God had told me to raise so much money for the church or something like that. I forgot. Exactly.
It was wonderful.
And you did.
And well, we raised a lot of money, but it was always a struggle sometimes. It was fun.
And I'm sure.
And I remember lots of times watching ball games. We had a group that watched Syracuse basketball.
Oh, yes.
Bills football. And by the way, I have a Yankees cap. I'm trying to figure out what to do with it. It was given to me. And I know I got Baltimore fans there, I know. And I'm
No.
I'm trying to figure out who to doom with this Yankees cap. It is probably X'd.
Who are you rooting for tomorrow? The underdog, as usual?
Oh yeah, Cincinnati. I don't have the emotional feelings. I hate watching Bills games now. I'm finding I get so emotionally involved. It's no fun watching. I'm usually to watch sports just for the sheer enjoyment of it, but Bills games are agony. And as the next quarterback, why did he throw that pass? Well, he should have taken the sack, the whole thing.
Well, you can empathize with quarterbacks having a problem, right?
Oh, whenever these quarterbacks get creamed, I think, oh no, poor guys. And then
I can remember your being here with Ron and Lou, and I would be upstairs and you would be watching football. Be this loud scream from downstairs. And I knew something must have happened in the game that got you all
We let
going.
it all, one of the times that we could let it all hang out. And for a minister, this was great therapy because I could be myself. I didn't have to worry about the parishioners or my responsibilities or anything. I could just plain old enjoy the game and let out my emotions.
Wonderful memories all around.
Thanks, Dick.
Thank you. It was
Yes.
fun.
Happy
Thanks.
birthday to
Happy birthday
Joyce.
to Joyce.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, she was
Yes,
the
and-
partner in all of this. She was my editor, my best friend, sustainer, all the rest.
Yes, thank you,
61
Dick.
years this summer.
It's been a wonderful time together. And I have been reminiscing on the different influences working at the church had on my life, which was considerable. We appreciate, your time and everyone who joined us today. Next week, we will have Mary Palmer talking about her experiences in the convent. So that should be a different approach and interesting too.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been great. Very good. Well,